For 23 years, Lyle believed his grandfather was a glorified delivery boy, a simple truck driver in the Vietnam War who hauled rations and kept his head down. But the heavy steel lockbox, hidden beneath the attic floorboards, told a different story. Adrian wasn't delivering supplies. He was delivering death. The air in the attic of the old Victorian house in Oak Haven, Oregon, was thick with the smell of dry, rot mothballs and forgotten decades. Lyle Brooks wiped a streak of grime from his forehead, leaving a smudge of grey dust across his brow. At 24, Lyle was a pragmatic young man, an archivist by trade, accustomed to sifting through the detritus of other people's lives. But this was different. This was his grandfather's life. Adrian Brooks had been moved into the Willows Care Facility 3 weeks prior. The dementia had crept in slowly, like a fog rolling over a bay, until Adrian began leaving the gas stove burning and wandering into the street at 3 a.m, looking for a convoy that didn't exist. Now it was Lyle's solemn duty to clear out the house, where Adrian had lived alone for 30 years since Lyle's grandmother passed. Adrian was a gentle, quiet man. His defining characteristic was his absolute, unshakable ordinariness. When Lyle was a boy, he would beg his grandfather for war stories, hoping for tales of heroism and firefights in the jungles of Vietnam. Adrian would always pat Lyle on the head and offer the same mundane narrative. "I drove a 2.5 deuce, Lyle." Adrian would say, his eyes crinkling with a warm, grandfatherly smile. "A big noisy cargo truck, hauled canned beans, spare boots and toilet paper from Da Nang to Hue. The most dangerous thing I ever faced was a blown tire in the mud. I just kept my head down, gripped the wheel and waited to go home. I was just a truck driver." It was a boring story, and because it was boring, Lyle had never once doubted it. Lyle dragged a heavy cardboard box labeled "Winter Coats, 1998, across the wooden floorboards. As the box slid, the floor gave a hollow, distinct clack. Lyle paused. He dragged the box back. Clack. Frowning, Lyle knelt and tapped the floorboard with his knuckles. It sounded entirely different from the solid wood around it. He retrieved a flathead screwdriver from his toolbox and wedged it into the seam. With a sharp crack, a 2-foot section of the floorboard popped up, revealing a dark rectangular cavity between the joists. Nestled in the fiberglass insulation was a heavy olive-drab steel lockbox. It looked like an old military ammunition crate, but modified, reinforced with a heavy brass padlock that had turned green with oxidation. Curiosity overrode Lyle's exhaustion. He hauled the heavy box out the metal cold against his palms. Finding a key in this mess would be impossible, so Lyle fetched a heavy crowbar from downstairs. It took 10 minutes of sweating, cursing, and violent prying before the hardened brass lock finally surrendered with a metallic snap. Lyle flipped the heavy latches and pushed the lid open. He expected to find old tax returns, maybe some love letters or cash hidden away by a paranoid old man. Instead, the smell of gun oil and old paper hit him. Resting on top was a folded piece of heavy canvas. Lyle pulled it back. Beneath it lay a disassembled, suppressed M1911 pistol, its blued steel gleaming with meticulous care. Beside it sat a combat knife with a serrated edge, the leather handle dark with what looked terrifyingly like old blood stains. "What in the world, Grandpa?" Lyle whispered to the empty attic. But it was the documents that made Lyle's blood run cold. Beneath the weapons lay a thick manila folder, bound with coarse twine. The cover was stamped with faded red ink, "Top Secret" / sensitive compartmented information. MACV-SOG. Lyle, with his background in history, recognized the acronym immediately. Military Assistance Command Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group. It was the most highly classified elite and lethal special operations unit of the Vietnam War. They didn't drive supply trucks. They ran black ops, cross-border assassinations, and rescue missions deep into Laos and Cambodia, places the United States officially denied having troops. Lyle's hands trembled as he untied the twine. The first item was a photograph. It showed 5 men standing in a dense jungle clearing. They were wearing unmarked tiger stripe camouflage, their faces painted with green and black grease. They carried an array of heavily modified non-standard weapons, and standing right in the center, holding a custom Car-15 rifle and staring into the camera with eyes as cold and flat as slate, was Adrian Brooks. He looked to be about 22 years old, but the innocent, gentle grandfather Lyle knew was nowhere in that face. That was the face of a killer. Beneath the photo was a Presidential Unit citation, highly classified, and a Silver Star citation. But Adrian's name wasn't on them. The name on the citations read, Operative Wraith, Unit 7, Recon Team Colorado. Lyle kept digging. He found a heavily redacted after-action report, dated November 14th, 1968. Operation Pale Horse. The report detailed a covert insertion into North Vietnam to eliminate a high-ranking NVA intelligence officer. The mission had gone disastrously wrong. 3 members of Recon Team Colorado were killed, but the target was successfully eliminated. The report read, Operative Wraith executed the primary target via close-quarters engagement and survived 48 hours of pursuit through hostile territory before extraction. Lethal efficiency confirmed. Adrian wasn't a truck driver. The truck driver persona was a carefully constructed lie, a ghost protocol meant to bury the blood on his hands. Then at the very bottom of the box, Lyle found the twist that made his heart skip a beat. It wasn't an old document from the 60s. It was a crisp white envelope, perfectly clean. Lyle tore it open. The letter inside was typed on plain paper, dated just 3 months ago. Artie. They unsealed the Saigon files. The Chinese intelligence assets we burned in '69 have sons who hold grudges. They know you're still alive. They know about the truck driver story. I'm moving. You should too. Keep your powder dry. Thomas Griggs. Lyle dropped the letter, the paper fluttering to the dusty floor. Someone was looking for his grandfather. And whoever they weren't bringing a pension check. The fluorescent lights of the University Library archive room buzzed with a low, irritating hum. Lyle sat across from Dr. Harrison Reed, a former military intelligence officer turned history professor. Harrison was a man who lived and breathed declassified military history, a man who rarely showed surprise. But as he spread Adrian's documents across the table, Harrison's face was pale. For Lyle, Harrison said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Where did you say you found these? Under the floorboards in my grandfather's attic. Lyle replied, his stomach tied in knots. Harrison, what am I looking at? My grandfather spent my whole life telling me he drove a supply truck. Harrison let out a short, incredulous laugh. A truck driver, Lyle, your grandfather, was MACVSOG, but not just regular SOG. Look at these operational codes. Harrison tapped a finger on a string of alphanumeric characters at the top of a yellowed page. He was part of a splinter element operating directly under CIA handler Richard Helms. This Wraith designation. There are rumors in the archival community about this guy. He was a fixer. When a high-value target needed to disappear quietly across the Cambodian border, they sent Wraith. But he's just Adrian Four. Lyle protested, struggling to reconcile the man who baked apple pies with the stone-cold killer in the files. He couldn't remember how to work the television remote last week. Dementia is a cruel thief, Harrison said softly. He pulled the 2022 letter toward him, the one signed by Thomas Griggs. But this is immediate. Thomas Griggs was an operative known as Viper. If Griggs sent this 3 months ago, he was terrified. SOG operatives made a lot of enemies, Lyle. Russian advisors, Chinese intelligence, NVA generals. If a leak exposed their true identities, there are people out there who would pay handsomely to settle a 50-year-old score. Who is looking for him? Lyle asked. I don't know, Harrison admitted, looking genuinely spooked. But if I were you, I'd take these files back, burn them, and pray nobody followed the paper trail to that nursing home. Lyle couldn't burn them. He needed answers. Leaving the university, he drove straight to the Willows Care Facility. The facility was brightly lit, smelling of antiseptic and boiled vegetables. Lyle walked down the quiet corridor to room 114. He pushed the door open. Adrian Brooks was sitting in a floral armchair by the window, staring blankly at a muted television playing a daytime soap opera. He wore a knitted cardigan and soft slippers. He looked incredibly frail, an 80-year-old man lost in the fog of his own failing mind. "Grandpa," Lyle said softly, stepping into the room. Adrian turned his eyes milky and vacant. It took a few seconds for recognition to spark. "Lyle, is that you, boy? Did you bring the truck around? We need to get the sea rations to Camp Evans before nightfall." Lyle's heart broke, but the fear in his gut pushed him forward. He pulled up a chair and sat knee to knee with the old man. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph of Recon Team Colorado. He placed it gently on Adrian's lap. "Grandpa, I was cleaning out the attic," Lyle said, his voice trembling slightly. "I found the box under the floor. The metal one." Adrian looked down at the photograph. For a long moment, nothing happened. The old man just stared at it, his breathing shallow. Lyle thought the dementia had completely shielded him from the memory. "I know you didn't drive a truck, Grandpa," Lyle pressed gently. "I know about MACVSOG. I know about Operation Pale Horse." Suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Adrian's milky, vacant expression vanished. The confusion melted away like wax over a flame. His spine straightened his shoulders, rolling back into a rigid military posture. When Adrian looked up, his eyes were no longer the lost eyes of a dementia patient. They were sharp-focused and terrifyingly clear. They were the eyes of the man in the photograph. "You broke the padlock," Adrian stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was entirely different, deeper, rougher, devoid of any grandfatherly warmth. "I used a crowbar," Lyle whispered, instinctively leaning back. "Sloppy," Adrian muttered. He picked up the photograph, his hand perfectly steady. "I told you I was a truck driver, Lyle, because truck driver is a boring story. Boring stories keep people safe. You shouldn't have dug." "Grandpa," there was a letter from Thomas Griggs. At the name, Adrian's jaw tightened. "Griggs is dead. They found him in a motel in Reno 2 weeks ago. Police called it a heart attack. I know better." Lyle felt the blood drain from his face. "What? How do you know that?" Adrian ignored the question. He stood up with a fluid grace that completely belied his 80 years. He walked to the window, peering through the blinds down at the parking lot, scanning the perimeter with professional paranoia. "The dementia," Lyle stammered. You were faking it." Adrian looked over his shoulder. "Not entirely. The fog comes and goes, kid. Sometimes I really don't know where I am. But when the threat is real, the training kicks in. It always kicks in." Adrian closed the blinds, completely plunging the room into shadows. He turned back to his grandson. Griggs broke protocol. He sent that letter through the mail. They tracked it. Adrian walked over to his hospital bed, reached under the mattress, and pulled out a sleek, modern Glock 19. Lyle gasped, jumping out of his chair. "How did you get that in here?" Lyle yelled. "Keep your voice down," Adrian snapped, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. "They're already here, Lyle." "Who? The sons of the men I didn't bury deep enough," Adrian said, grimly, chambering around. "Now listen to me very carefully. You are going to walk out that door, go to your car, and drive away. You do not look back. You do not call the police. You forget you ever found that box." Before Lyle could protest, the fire alarm in the hallway shattered the quiet of the nursing home. A blaring, rhythmic screech echoed through the walls. Adrian's eyes darted to the door. "Not a fire," he whispered, a distraction to clear the civilians out of the hallways. He looked at Lyle, and for a brief second, the grandfatherly warmth flickered back into his eyes. "I'm sorry, Lyle. I wanted you to remember the man who baked pies. But Wraith is the only one getting out of this building alive." Heavy, deliberate footsteps sounded outside room 114. They stopped right outside the door. Adrian raised the pistol. "Get down," he ordered. The heavy composite door of room 114 didn't just open. It splintered inward with a violent, suppressed thwack, the frame groaning under the force of a tactical breaching ram. Before the wood even hit the linoleum floor, Adrian Brooks was moving. He didn't possess the explosive speed of his youth, but he moved with a terrifying wasted-no-motion efficiency that age couldn't steal. Two men stepped through the ruined doorway. They wore dark civilian clothes, low-profile body armor, and carried suppressed submachine guns. They looked professional, they looked lethal, but they were looking at the bed, expecting an 80-year-old dementia patient. Adrian fired twice from the shadows beside the wardrobe. The muffled pop-pop of his Glock 19 was almost entirely drowned out by the blaring fire alarm. The lead intruder dropped instantly, a neat crimson hole appearing in his tactical goggles. The second man pivoted his weapon coming up, but Adrian was already shifting his angle. He stepped into the man's guard, parried the barrel of the submachine gun upward with his left forearm, and drove the muzzle of his pistol into the gap of the man's body armor beneath his armpit. He pulled the trigger once. The man crumpled, gasping. "Move!" Adrian barked, grabbing the submachine gun from the falling man and tossing it to a paralyzed Lyle. "Catch!" Lyle fumbled the heavy weapon, dropping it onto his foot with a yelp. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. He was an archivist, a man who spent his days reading about history, not dodging bullets in a nursing home. "Grandpa, you just killed them," Lyle stammered, staring at the growing pool of blood on the floor. "They were going to do the same to us, Lyle. Keep up." Adrian stepped out into the hallway, sweeping the corridor with his stolen weapon. The hallway was filled with smoke from a discharged canister, and the strobe lights of the alarm system painted the walls in chaotic flashes of white. Nurses and elderly patients were screaming, barricading themselves in rooms, or shuffling toward the fire exits. Adrian grabbed Lyle by the collar of his jacket and hauled him forward. They bypassed the main stairwell. "Fatal funnel," Adrian muttered, and headed for the maintenance corridor at the back of the wing. "Who are they?" Lyle yelled over the alarm, slipping on a discarded lunch tray as they sprinted down a service ramp. "You said Chinese intelligence." "That was half the truth," Adrian replied, his breathing heavy but controlled. They reached a set of heavy steel doors leading to the laundry facility. Adrian paused, checking the corners. The target in 69, the intelligence officer he was meeting with an American, a CIA handler. They were selling troop movements to the NVA. The ambush that killed my team wasn't luck. We were sold out. Lyle's mind spun. "So you—" "My orders were to eliminate the NVA officer. But I recognized the American, Adrian said grimly. It was a man named Richard Caldwell. He was untouchable back in Washington. I couldn't kill him without bringing the entire agency down on my head, and I couldn't prove it because the evidence was classified to protect the agency's reputation. So I stole Caldwell's ledger. The proof of his treason. I buried it, came home, and became a nobody. A simple truck driver. Adrian pushed open the laundry doors, leading them into a humid, cavernous room filled with industrial washers. Caldwell died a billionaire. Adrian continued weaving through the metal carts. But his son David Caldwell just got appointed to the Senate Intelligence Committee. The unsealed Saigon files mention a missing ledger. If David Caldwell finds out I'm alive, he knows I have the one thing that can destroy his family's legacy and put him in federal prison. They aren't foreign agents, Lyle realized the horror dawning on him. They're American mercenaries. Private contractors, cleaners, Adrian corrected. They reached the loading dock doors. Adrian peered through the reinforced glass. A black SUV was idling in the alleyway, 2 armed men leaning against the hood. We can't go that way, Lyle whispered. We aren't going to, Adrian said. He turned to an industrial chemical supply closet. He shot the padlock off, grabbed 2 massive jugs of industrial bleach and ammonia, and kicked them over, letting the liquids pool together on the concrete floor. Toxic gas. Hold your breath, close your eyes, and run for your car when the glass breaks, Adrian commanded. He didn't wait for Lyle's confirmation. Adrian leveled his weapon at the heavy loading dock windows and fired a concentrated burst. The glass shattered outward in a shower of deadly shards. The 2 men outside shouted, raising their weapons, but Adrian had already tossed a flare from a survival kit he'd scavenged from the maintenance room into the chemical puddle. A thick, acrid cloud of noxious white smoke instantly billowed outward, choking the alleyway. The mercenaries outside began violently coughing, blinded and disoriented. Now Lyle. They burst through the ruined doors, sprinting through the toxic fog. Lyle's eyes burned like fire, his lungs screaming, but he kept his hand firmly gripped on his grandfather's sweater. They scrambled over a low chain-link fence and tumbled into the adjacent parking lot, where Lyle had parked his Honda Civic. Keys! Adrian demanded. Lyle tossed them. Adrian slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. He threw the car into reverse tires, squealing against the asphalt, and tore out of the parking lot, just as a hail of bullets shattered the rear windshield, raining safety glass over Lyle's head. "Where are we going?" Lyle shouted, over the rushing wind, ducking down in the passenger seat. Adrian's eyes were locked on the rearview mirror, cold and calculating. "We're going to make a delivery. The one I should have made 50 years ago." The Oakhaven Municipal Reservoir sat at the edge of the county, surrounded by dense pine forests and chained-off access roads. The moon was high, casting long skeletal shadows across the concrete dam. Adrian drove the battered Civic off the main road, navigating a rutted dirt path with the headlights off until they reached a rusted abandoned pump station. "Get out," Adrian said, his voice raspy. Lyle climbed out his legs, shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a deep, bone-chilling terror. "Grandpa, we need to call the FBI. We need to go to the press." The people David Caldwell employs own the local FBI field office. Lyle. Adrian said, walking toward the dilapidated pump station. "And the press needs proof. Right now, all we have is the word of an old man with a documented history of dementia." Adrian knelt by a rusted drainage grate. He wedged his fingers into the iron lattice and, with a grunt of exertion, hauled the heavy grate aside. He reached deep into the muck and pulled out a PVC pipe sealed tight with waterproof caps. "The ledger?" Lyle asked. Adrian nodded, unscrewing the cap. He pulled out a small leather-bound notebook wrapped in plastic. Every transaction, every name, every American soldier Caldwell sold out for blood money. I hid it here the day I got back from Vietnam. Suddenly the forest around them erupted in blinding white light. High-intensity tactical floodlights clicked on from the tree line, pinning Adrian and Lyle against the concrete wall of the pump station, like insects on a display board. The low hum of armored SUV engines rumbled from the dirt road. They had been tracked. "Drop the weapon, Brooks, kick the book away!" A voice boomed through a megaphone. Armed men fanned out from the tree line, their weapons trained squarely on them. From the center of the formation stepped a tall man in an immaculate dark trench coat. He didn't carry a rifle. He carried an air of absolute arrogant authority. "I have to admit, Wraith," the man called out, stepping into the edge of the light. "You led us on a hell of a chase. I thought the dementia was real. I thought my father's ghosts were finally put to rest." "David Caldwell." Adrian spat, shielding his eyes against the glare. "You look just like the traitor who sired you." Caldwell smiled thinly. "And you look like a tired old man who should have stayed in his nursing home. Toss the ledger, Adrian. I'll make it quick for you. I might even let the boy walk." "He's lying, Grandpa," Lyle whispered, terrified. "I know, kid," Adrian murmured back. He looked down at the ledger, then over at Lyle. "Lyle, do you remember when you were 10 and you broke Mrs. Gable's window with a baseball?" Lyle blinked, completely thrown by the question. You tried to hide the bat, but I told you if you make a mess you own it. You stand in the light and take the hit." Adrian's eyes locked onto Lyle's communicating volumes without a single word. "Get ready to run toward the spillway." Adrian turned back to Caldwell. "You want it, David? Come get it." Adrian tossed the ledger into the dirt between them. Caldwell gestured to two of his mercenaries. They jogged forward, their rifles trained on Adrian. One of them knelt to pick up the book. "You know, Caldwell," Adrian shouted, his voice echoing across the empty reservoir. "You're arrogant, just like your old man. You assumed I came out here to hide." Caldwell frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't bring the ledger here in 1969. Adrian said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "I brought it here tonight. I retrieved it from my lockbox this morning, before Lyle even came over." Lyle stared at his grandfather. The lockbox, the false floor. Adrian hadn't forgotten it. He had left it for Lyle to find. "I knew Griggs was dead," Adrian continued. "I knew you were closing in. But I needed a distraction. I needed you to send your best men after me all in one place. Because this pump station, it isn't abandoned." Adrian pulled a small black detonator from his pocket. It wasn't modern. It was heavily taped military issue from a bygone era. "I spent 20 years as a quiet truck driver," Adrian said, his thumb resting heavily on the firing button. "But before that, I was a demolitions expert." Caldwell's eyes widened in sheer panic. "Fall back, shoot him now." "Run, Lyle!" Adrian roared. Lyle didn't hesitate. He dove over the concrete embankment, scrambling down the steep, grassy hill toward the reservoir's spillway, just as the gunfire erupted. Adrian Brooks didn't flinch. He absorbed 2 rounds to the chest, his body jerking backward. But as he fell, his thumb depressed the heavy button. The earth beneath the pump station didn't just explode, it shattered. 50 pounds of aged, highly unstable C4 explosive wired beneath the concrete foundation detonated with a catastrophic, deafening roar. A massive fireball illuminated the night sky, instantly vaporizing the pump station, the mercenaries, and the arrogant senator who had come to bury his father's sins. The shockwave threw Lyle face first into the muddy bank of the spillway. Dirt chunks of concrete and burning debris rained down around him, hissing as they struck the dark water. For a long time there was nothing but the ringing in Lyle's ears and the crackle of burning pine trees. Slowly, agonizingly, Lyle crawled back up the embankment. The clearing was gone. A massive, smoking crater had replaced the dirt road and the pump station. The SUVs were overturned, burning husks. There was no sign of Caldwell the mercenaries or Adrian. Tears streamed down Lyle's dust-caked face. He fell to his knees at the edge of the crater, staring into the fiery wreckage. His grandfather was gone. The gentle man who baked pies, the lethal phantom who had waged a one-man war, both had vanished in the fire. Then something caught his eye. A few feet away, resting safely behind a thick concrete pylon that had shielded it from the blast, was the leather-bound ledger. Adrian hadn't tossed it to the mercenaries. He had tossed a dummy book. The real ledger had been carefully placed exactly where it would survive. Beside it lay a small folded piece of paper. Lyle scrambled over and picked it up with trembling hands. It was a note written in Adrian's steady, precise handwriting. Lyle. If you're reading this, the ghost is finally at rest. The proof is in your hands. Take it to Dr. Reed. He has contacts at the Justice Department who aren't bought. Expose them all. And remember, kid, I might have been Wraith in the jungle, but being your grandfather was the only mission I ever truly cared about. Love, the truck driver. Lyle clutched the ledger to his chest, the weight of his grandfather's legacy heavy in his arms. The sirens of Oak Haven's police and fire departments were wailing in the distance, drawing closer to the reservoir. Adrian Brooks was dead. But the war he had fought in the shadows for 50 years was finally over. And as Lyle stepped into the tree line to vanish before the authorities arrived, he knew exactly what he had to do. He had one last delivery to make. If you enjoyed this thrilling story of hidden pasts and ultimate sacrifice, please smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more incredible heart-pounding tales of forgotten heroes right to your screen. Drop a comment below on what you think Lyle should do next.